The war room aboard the human command station Atlas was silent as Admiral Taiwan Kang stared at the tactical display, and the numbers he saw made his stomach turn. The Valkyrie had not accepted the lesson of the remembrance, and instead they had doubled down on their aggression. And they had called in every favor and every alliance they had built over 3,000 years. 212,000 ships were now converging on human space, and the Valkyrie had convinced a dozen smaller species to join their cause. And they were heading directly for Earth with the intention of destroying the heart of humanity once and for all. "They are insane," muttered Commander G.A. Park, his second in command. "We showed them what we could do, and they still want to fight. Pride makes people do terrible things," Taiwan said. And he thought about all the history he had studied, and he thought about all the species that had made the same mistake the Valkyrie were making now. Behind him, a group of sleeper veterans stood watching the display, and their faces showed no fear. And they had seen worse odds during the Great War and had won anyway. "Give us the order," said General Min Seo-yoon, who had commanded ground forces at the Battle of Centauri and had not aged a day in 35 centuries of frozen sleep. "We can meet them at the Corinth Nebula, and we can end this in a matter of hours." "End it how?" Taiwan asked. The general met his eyes without flinching. "The same way we ended the Great War," she said. "Complete destruction and no survivors. And a message to the galaxy that attacking humanity means extinction." Taiwan turned away from the display and walked to the observation window. And he looked out at the stars that humanity had spread among. And he thought about what his species had become and what they had promised to be. 3,500 years ago, he said quietly, "We made a promise. And we said we would never again become what we were during the Great War. The Valkyrie have not given us a choice." General Yoon said. "There is always a choice," said a new voice. And everyone turned to see Ambassador Yuna Seong entering the war room. She walked to stand beside Taiwan at the window, and her face was calm, but her eyes held something fierce. "Admiral," she said, "I would like to request permission to attempt a diplomatic solution. The time for diplomacy has passed." General Yoon said. "They have refused every offer we have made. They have refused offers made at a distance," Yuna said. "They have refused words transmitted through space. And they have refused demonstrations of power." She turned to face the assembly, and her voice grew stronger. "I want to go to them directly," she said. "I want to go to the Valkyrie homeworld, alone and unarmed. And I want to show them what we really are." "That is suicide," Commander Park said. "Perhaps," Yuna acknowledged. "But if I succeed, then we save millions of lives. And we prove that humanity has truly changed. And we show the galaxy that we can solve problems without destruction." Taiwan studied her face for a long moment, and he saw the same determination that had made her smile in the face of a war declaration. And he understood that this was what she had been working toward from the beginning. "The fleet is ready," General Yoon said, and there was warning in her voice. "We can protect Earth and crush their armada in a single engagement." "I know we can," Taiwan said. "I know we can destroy them. And I know we can burn their worlds and erase their species from existence." He paused and looked at the sleeper veterans who had fought in the Great War. "But is that who we want to be?" he asked. "Is that the humanity we want to show the galaxy?" General Yoon was silent, and her ancient eyes held something that might have been pain. "We spent 3,500 years asleep," she finally said. "And we did that because we could not live with what we had become. And we could not face the galaxy we had burned." She looked at Yuna with new respect. "If there is a chance to end this without becoming monsters again," she said, "then we should take it." Taiwan nodded slowly. "Ambassador Seong," he said, "you have permission to attempt your mission, and the fleet will hold position and wait for your signal." 12 hours later, Yuna's small shuttle dropped out of hyperspace above the Velthari homeworld, and 100 warships immediately surrounded her and demanded her surrender. She transmitted her identity and her request for an audience with the Velthari Council. And after several tense hours, she was allowed to land. The council chamber was vast and cold, and the Velthari leaders looked at her with hatred and contempt. And they could not understand why she had come. "You dare enter our world alone?" the council leader demanded. "You dare show your face after what your people did to our fleet?" "I came to show you something," Yuna said. And she activated a portable projector. Images filled the air. And they were the same images that Elder Dravok had shown to the Galactic Council. And they depicted humanity at its worst. And they showed the death and destruction of the Great War in terrible detail. The Velthari watched in silence as world after world burned, and species after species was erased from existence. And humanity swept across the galaxy like an unstoppable tide of fire. "This is what we were," Yuna said quietly. "This is what we became when we were pushed to the edge of extinction. And this is the monster that lives inside humanity." She let them see it all, and she did not hide any of the horror. And she did not make excuses for what her species had done. After the war ended, she continued, "We looked at ourselves, and we were horrified. And we realized that we had become worse than the enemies who had tried to destroy us." She met the council leader's eyes directly. "So we made a promise," she said. "We swore that we would never again become that monster. And we have kept that promise for 35 centuries. "Then you are weak," the council leader said. "And weakness deserves to be conquered." "No," Yuna said, and her voice was firm. "Choosing mercy when you have the power to destroy is not weakness. And it is the greatest strength there is." She stepped closer to the council, and her next words were spoken with absolute conviction. "Your fleet is gathering to attack Earth," she said. "And you believe you will destroy us. But you are wrong. And if you force us to fight, we will win, and your species will cease to exist." "You cannot know that," the council leader said. But uncertainty had crept into his voice. "I know it because I have seen the ships we have kept hidden for 3,000 years, Yuna said. "I know it because I have spoken to the veterans who fought in the Great War and who have been waiting in cryogenic sleep for exactly this moment." She pulled up one final image, and it showed the full extent of humanity's hidden fleet. And the Velthari leaders gasped at the scale of what they were seeing. "We could have destroyed your armada at Haven's Rest," Yuna said. "We could destroy it now before it reaches Earth. And we could burn your homeworld and every colony you have ever built. But we do not want to," she said. "We want to prove that we have changed. And we want to show the galaxy that the monsters of the Great War are gone. And we want to build something better." She knelt before the council, and the gesture shocked everyone in the chamber. "I am offering you peace," she said. "Not the peace of the conquered, but the peace of equals. And I am offering you a place at our side as we build the next 3,000 years." The council leader stared at her for a long moment, and the hatred in his eyes slowly faded as he truly understood what was being offered. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you show us mercy after we declared war on you?" "Because mercy is what we have been practicing for 3,500 years, Yuna said. "And today we finally get to prove that the practice was worth it." 3 days later, the Velthari Armada stood down, and the war that had never truly begun came to an end. The contested worlds became shared territory, and Velthari and human colonists learned to live together. And the galaxy watched in amazement as two species chose cooperation over destruction on Concordia Prime. Ambassador Yuna stood in the gardens where the peace crystal had been shattered, and she watched as human and Velthari children played together under the light of a dozen distant suns. Elder Drevuk approached her slowly, and his ancient face held something that might have been hope. "You have done something remarkable," he said. You have proven that a species can truly change, Yuna smiled. And it was the same warm, genuine smile she had worn when the war was declared. Someone asked me once why we smiled when the Velthari threatened us, she said. And the answer is simple. She looked at the children playing and the future they represented. We smiled because after 3,500 years, we finally had a chance to show everyone that we are not the same species that burned the galaxy. She said, we grew up, and we learned that real strength means choosing peace when destruction would be easier. The old Corvani nodded slowly. And was it worth it? He asked. All those centuries of restraint, and all that patience. Yuna watched a human child help a young Velthari learn to climb a tree. And the crystalline child's laughter rang across the garden like bells. Every single day, she said, and somewhere in the depths of human space, the sleeper veterans returned to their cryogenic pods. And they went back to sleep with something they had not felt in 3,500 years. They went to sleep with hope that they would never be needed again. The Velthari Armada dropped out of hyperspace above the human colony world of Haven's Rest. And High Commander Zeleth stood on the bridge of his flagship and smiled at the sight of the planet below. 40,000 warships spread out behind him in perfect formation. And each ship was equipped with the most advanced weapons the Velthari Dominion could build. And together they represented the greatest military force the galaxy had seen in 3,000 years. Scan the system, Zeleth ordered, and his crystalline form glowed with anticipation. Find their defensive fleet and calculate the time needed for their destruction. His tactical officer worked at the sensors for several seconds. And then confusion crossed her features. Commander, she said, I am detecting only a single vessel in defensive position. A single vessel, Zeleth repeated. And annoyance crept into his voice. Show me. The main display activated. And Zeleth saw something that made no sense. And floating between his armada and the planet was one ship. And it was not even a particularly large ship by modern standards, but there was something wrong about it. And the design was unlike anything in the current databases. And its hull was covered in scars and marks that spoke of battles fought long ago. What is that thing? Zeleth demanded. Analysis indicates the vessel is more than 3,000 years old, the tactical officer reported. And her voice trembled slightly. Records identify it as the battleship Remembrance. And it was last active during the Great War. A museum piece, Zeleth laughed. And the sound echoed through the bridge. They send a relic to defend against us. And this is what the famous humans have become. He straightened to his full height and broadcast on all frequencies so that his words would reach the human ship and the planet below human vessel. He said, You are ordered to surrender immediately, and if you refuse, you will be destroyed, and your planet will follow. There was a moment of silence, and then a voice responded, and it was calm and measured and completely unafraid. This is the battleship Remembrance. The voice said, We do not surrender, and we never have. And we are here to deliver a message. The only message I want from you is your unconditional surrender. Zeleth said, That is not the message we carry, the human replied. We are here to give you a demonstration, and we suggest you watch carefully. Zeleth felt anger rising in his crystalline core, and he turned to his weapons officer with contempt in his eyes. Destroy that ship, he ordered. All vessels fire at will. The order went out across the fleet, and 40,000 warships opened fire simultaneously. And the space around the Remembrance filled with energy beams and missiles and weapons of every kind. The barrage should have vaporized the ancient vessel instantly, and it should have left nothing but scattered atoms. And Zeleth waited for the satisfaction of watching the human ship die. But when the weapons fire cleared, the Remembrance was still there, and it had not moved, and it had not even attempted to evade. And its shields glowed faintly with absorbed energy, but showed no signs of stress. Impossible. The tactical officer whispered. Zeleth stared at the display and could not understand what he was seeing. And his entire fleet had unleashed enough firepower to destroy a small moon. And the human ship had simply absorbed it all. All vessels concentrate fire, he commanded. And desperation crept into his voice. Continue firing until that ship is destroyed. The fleet obeyed. And for a full minute, the Remembrance weathered a continuous storm of weapons fire. And it stood in the center of the destruction like a rock in a hurricane. And it did not even rock from the impacts. And then the human ship finally responded. The Remembrance moved forward. And it moved faster than anything Zeleth had ever seen. And it seemed to blur across space as it entered the heart of his formation. Blue light erupted from the ancient vessel. And it spread across the fleet like a wave. And wherever it touched, the Veltari ships simply stopped. Zeleth watched in horror as ship after ship went dark. And their weapons fell silent, and their engines died. And they drifted helplessly through space with their crews trapped inside in exactly 60 seconds. Half of his fleet was disabled. 20,000 ships had been rendered powerless without a single one being destroyed. And the Remembrance had not even used what appeared to be its main weapons. The human voice returned to the communications channel. This concludes the demonstration. The voice said, "As you can see, we could have killed everyone aboard those vessels. And we chose not to, and we have disabled your weapons and engines. But your life support systems remain functional." Zeleth could not speak, and his body felt frozen with shock. And everything he had believed about human weakness was crumbling around him. "You have 24 hours to communicate our mercy to your government," the human continued. "Take your surviving ships and go home and tell your leaders what you have seen. And give them this message from the human collective." The voice paused. And when it spoke again, there was something ancient and terrible beneath the calm words. "We remember what we were," the voice said. "We remember the fire and the death and the worlds we burned. And we swore we would never become that again. And we have kept that promise for 35 centuries. But if you force us to fight," the voice continued, "if you push us back to what we once were, then we will not show mercy a second time. And the Veltari will join the 200 species we destroyed in the Great War. The choice is yours." The Remembrance turned away from the crippled fleet and jumped into hyperspace. And it left behind 20,000 disabled ships and 20,000 functional ones. And it left behind a high commander who had just learned that everything he knew was a lie. Zeleth stood on his bridge and stared at the space where the human ship had been. And he understood now why the older species had seemed so afraid when the war was declared. He ordered his communications officer to establish a link with the Veltari homeworld. And he prepared to deliver the message that would determine the fate of his species. But when the connection was made, and he saw the face of the Veltari Council, he could tell immediately that they did not understand, and they refused to understand. And their pride would not let them accept what had happened. "You failed," the council leader said. "You had 40,000 ships against one. And you failed. The human ship was invulnerable," Zeleth tried to explain. "Our weapons did nothing. And their technology is beyond anything we imagined. Then we will build more ships." The council leader declared, "We will call upon our allies. And we will create a fleet so large that no single vessel can stand against it." "You do not understand," Zeleth said. And desperation filled his voice. "They showed us mercy. And they could have killed everyone, and they want us to stop. Mercy is weakness," the council leader said. "And weakness will be exploited, and the Veltari do not surrender to anyone." The connection was cut. And Zeleth stood alone on his bridge, and he knew that his government had just condemned his species to destruction across the galaxy. Every civilization watched the recordings of the battle, and the elder species nodded grimly because they remembered this, and they had seen this before. And they knew what came next when mercy was rejected. The humans had offered peace, and the Valkyrie had refused. And now there was only one question left to answer. Could humanity keep their promise to themselves? Or would they become the monsters of the Great War once again? Admiral Taiwan Kang had been retired for 60 years when the message arrived at his home on the colony world of New Bizen. And he had spent those 6 decades believing he would never again wear a uniform. He was 203 years old, which was middle-aged by modern human standards. And he had devoted his entire career to studying the military history of his species. And he knew more about the Great War than almost anyone alive. The message was simple and direct. And it contained only 2 words that every human military officer learned during their training. And those words had not been spoken officially in more than 3,000 years. Condition Lazarus. Taiwan stared at the message for a long time, and memories of things he had only read about began to surface in his mind. And he understood immediately what was about to happen. 12 hours later, he stood at the entrance to the Jericho shipyard, and his breath caught in his throat at what he saw. The shipyard filled an entire asteroid belt, and it stretched for thousands of miles in every direction. And it had been classified as a historical museum for as long as anyone could remember. And school children took field trips here to learn about the old days. But the museum was gone now. And in its place was something that made Taiwan's heart pound with a mixture of awe and fear. Ships filled the void between the asteroids. And they were not the graceful, elegant vessels of the modern era. And they were brutal, angular things covered in weapons and armor. And they looked like they had been designed by people who expected to fight gods. "Admiral Kang," said a voice beside him. And he turned to see a young officer in a uniform he did not recognize. "Welcome to Jericho, sir. And the council has appointed you as fleet commander." "How is this possible?" Taiwan asked. And he could not take his eyes off the massive warships. These vessels should be ruins by now, and the technology should be completely obsolete. The young officer smiled, and it was the same knowing smile that Taiwan had seen on Ambassador Xiao's face in the news broadcasts. "The ships were never actually decommissioned," she said. "They were stored and maintained, and every generation of engineers has quietly upgraded them with new technology. And they have been waiting here for 3,000 years. Waiting for what? Waiting for today." She led him through the shipyard. And everywhere he looked, he saw humans working with quiet determination, and none of them seemed afraid. And all of them moved with the confidence of people who had trained their entire lives for this moment. "How many ships do we have?" Taiwan asked. "Active and ready for deployment," the officer said. "Approximately 12,000 capital ships, 50,000 support vessels, and more than 200,000 fighter craft." Taiwan stopped walking and stared at her, and the numbers were impossible. And they meant that humanity had maintained a secret military force larger than any other species could imagine. "That is not all," the officer said, and she gestured for him to follow her to a different section of the shipyard. They entered a massive chamber filled with rows upon rows of metal pods, and each pod contained a sleeping human figure, and there were thousands of them stretching into the distance. "The sleepers," Taiwan whispered. "Yes, sir," the officer confirmed. "These are veterans of the Great War, and they volunteered for long-term cryogenic preservation. And they agreed to wake only if humanity faced an existential threat. They have been asleep for 3,000 years. 3,500 years," she said. "And they remember everything, and they remember how to fight. And they remember what it means to wage total war." Taiwan approached one of the pods and looked at the face of the sleeping veteran inside. And it was an old face marked with scars, and even in sleep it looked hard and dangerous. "Are we waking them?" "The process has already begun," the officer said. "The first wave will be conscious within 24 hours. Taiwan felt the weight of what was happening settle onto his shoulders, and he understood that he was about to lead humanity back to war for the first time in more than 3 millennia. The Velthari have 40,000 ships, he said. We could overwhelm them with numbers alone, and we could end this war in a matter of days. Yes, sir, the officer agreed. We could destroy them completely. Is that what the council wants? The officer was silent for a moment, and when she spoke her voice was careful. The council wants you to end the threat, she said. They have not specified how, and they have left the decision in your hands. Taiwan turned away from the sleeping veterans and looked out at the ships that filled the void. And he thought about everything he knew of history. And he thought about what humanity had done in the past. And he thought about what they had promised to become. Contact Ambassador Seong, he said. Tell her I need to speak with her before we deploy. Yes, sir. As the officer hurried away, one of the cryogenic pods began to open, and a man climbed out on unsteady legs. And he looked around at the shipyard with eyes that had not seen light in 35 centuries. He was tall and heavily muscled, despite his long sleep, and his face bore the marks of battles fought before most modern species existed. And when his eyes found Taiwan, they were sharp and clear and utterly without fear. What year is it? The sleeper asked. It is the year 5847 of the unified calendar. Taiwan replied. The veteran nodded slowly, and a grim smile crossed his face. Someone finally got stupid enough to start a war, he said. The Velthari Dominion, Taiwan confirmed. They have declared war and are mobilizing 40,000 ships. 40,000, the sleeper said. And he laughed, and the sound was cold and hard. We fought the Battle of Proxima against 400,000 enemy vessels. And we won in 6 hours. He stretched his arms and looked around at the ancient warships with something like fondness. Same rules as before, he asked. Or are we being gentle this time? Taiwan did not answer immediately, and the weight of the question hung in the air between them. And he knew that whatever he decided would shape the future of the entire galaxy. I do not know yet. Taiwan finally said. The sleeper studied him for a long moment, and something in his hard eyes softened just slightly. Good answer, he said. The young ones who commanded us in the Great War, they never hesitated. And they never wondered if there was another way. And look where that got us. He placed a hand on Taiwan's shoulder. You take your time deciding, he said, and you choose carefully. And whatever you decide, we will follow you. Because that is what we swore to do when we went to sleep all those years ago. More pods were opening now, and more sleepers were climbing out. And they looked around at the ships and the stars with eyes that remembered things the galaxy had tried to forget. And somewhere, in the darkness of space, the Velthari fleet was advancing toward human territory, completely unaware of what was waiting for them. The news of the Velthari declaration spread across the galaxy in a matter of hours. And by the next morning, every inhabited world was talking about the coming war. And everyone wanted to know what would happen next on the ancient world of Korvath Prime, the seat of the Korvani Collective. Elder Dravok stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Council and prepared to speak about things that most species had forgotten. The council chamber was packed with representatives from every major civilization, and they were all afraid. And they were all demanding answers. And they all looked to the elder species for guidance. You must tell us what to do, said Counselor the Mech of the Jarathi Federation. And his forearms waved frantically as he spoke. The Velthari have the largest fleet in the galaxy, and they have weapons that can destroy entire planets. And the humans have nothing but trading ships and passenger vessels. The humans have been peaceful for 3,000 years. Added Representative Ilith of the Mandari Union, and her bioluminescent skin flickered with distress. They do not even have a standing military anymore, and they will be slaughtered. Drevok listened to their panicked words. And he remembered a time when the galaxy had spoken very differently about humanity. And he knew that the truth would terrify them even more than the war. "You are all very young," Drevok said. And his voice cut through the noise and brought silence to the chamber. "Your species rose to prominence during the long peace, and you have never known war. And you have never seen what came before. We know the history," the mech said. "There was a great conflict long ago, and many species were destroyed. And then the Concordia Accords brought peace." "You know nothing," Drevok said. And there was something sharp in his voice that made everyone listen more carefully. "You know the stories that were approved for teaching. And you know the version of history that was designed to help the galaxy heal. And you do not know the truth." He raised his hand and activated the chamber's holographic display. And ancient records began to appear in the air above them. And many of them bore seals that marked them as classified for more than 3,000 years, before the Great War, Drevok said. Humanity was a young species, and they had only been traveling among the stars for a few centuries. And they were curious and friendly, and eager to make allies. Images appeared showing early human explorers, meeting with alien species. And the humans in these images looked small and uncertain, and they carried no weapons. And they smiled at everyone they met, but not everyone welcomed them, Drevok continued. The 12 empires saw humanity as a threat, and they feared that humans would spread too quickly. And they decided to destroy the human race before they could grow any stronger. New images appeared, and these showed massive alien fleets converging on human worlds, and they showed cities burning, and they showed humans dying by the millions. The 12 empires attacked without warning, Drevok said. They struck at Earth itself, and they killed billions of humans in a single day. And they believed they had won. The council chamber was completely silent now, and everyone watched the ancient recordings with growing horror. But they were wrong, Drevok said, because they did not understand what humans truly were, and they did not know what humans would become when they were pushed to the edge of extinction. The images changed again, and now they showed something different, and the council members began to gasp and cry out in shock. Human ships filled the display, but they were not the sleek, peaceful vessels that everyone knew, and they were massive warships covered in weapons, and they moved with terrible purpose through the darkness of space. The humans did not surrender, Drevok said. They did not negotiate, and they did not ask for mercy. And instead, they built weapons that the galaxy had never seen before. Recording after recording played, and they showed human fleets tearing through enemy armadas like they were made of paper. And they showed human soldiers fighting on alien worlds with savage determination. And they showed entire star systems being conquered in days. In less than 50 years, Drevok said. Humanity destroyed the 12 empires completely. And they did not just defeat them, and they erased them. And today you cannot find a single survivor from any of those species, because humanity made sure there would be none. That cannot be true, Elith whispered, and her lights had gone dim with fear. It is true, Drevok said, and it was only the beginning. He showed them more recordings, and these were even worse. And they showed human forces spreading across the galaxy like a fire that could not be stopped. After the 12 empires fell, Drevok said, other species tried to stop humanity, and they formed alliances. And they built defenses, and none of it mattered. And the humans destroyed them all. How many? The mech asked. And his voice was barely audible. The humans annihilated more than 200 species during the Great War, Drevok said. They burned thousands of worlds, and they killed trillions of beings. And by the end, there was no force in the galaxy that could stand against them. The final recording showed a gathering much like this one. But the delegates in that ancient chamber looked broken and defeated. And they knelt before a human woman in military uniform who stood above them all. This is the signing of the Concordia Accords, Dravok said. And it was not a peace treaty, and it was not a negotiation. And it was humanity dictating terms to every surviving civilization in the galaxy. Why did they stop? Asked a young Mandari delegate. If they were so powerful, then why did they not simply conquer everything? Dravok was quiet for a long moment. And when he spoke again, his voice was soft, because they looked at what they had become, he said, and they were horrified. And the humans had built themselves into the greatest killing machine the galaxy had ever known. And when the war was over, they looked in the mirror, and they saw monsters. He shut off the display, and the chamber fell into darkness. The Concordia Accords were not just terms of surrender for the galaxy. Dravok said they were humanity's promise to themselves. And they swore they would never again become what they had been, and they put away their weapons. And they chose peace. Then we have nothing to fear, the mech said. And there was hope in his voice. The humans have changed. And they will not fight. You do not understand, Dravok said. I have watched the humans for 3,000 years. And they have not forgotten what they are capable of. And they have been waiting all this time for a chance to prove they have truly changed. He looked around at the council members with ancient, tired eyes. The Velthari have not declared war on a peaceful species, he said. They have declared war on a species that has been restraining itself for 35 centuries. And now we will all discover whether humanity's promise to themselves is stronger than their nature. In human space. In a facility buried deep beneath the surface of a forgotten moon. Automated systems that had been dormant for millennia received a signal they had been programmed to wait for, and the ancient war machines of humanity began to wake. The great hall of the Galactic Assembly stretched for nearly a mile in every direction. And today, it held more than 50,000 delegates from across the known universe. And every single one of them had come to witness history. Being made Ambassador Unision stood at the human delegation's podium with her hands folded calmly in front of her as she watched the Velthari High Speaker approach the central platform. And she already knew what was about to happen, because the Velthari had made no secret of their intentions. The Velthari were magnificent creatures, standing 8 feet tall with bodies made of living crystal that caught the light and threw rainbows across the walls. And they had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 3,000 years. And they believed that made them powerful enough to take whatever they wanted. High Speaker Varnth raised his crystalline arms, and the entire assembly fell silent. And when he spoke, his voice rang like 1,000 bells chiming at once. We address the human collective, Varnth announced. And his words echoed through the vast chamber. For too long you have occupied worlds that belong to the Velthari Dominion by ancient right. And we have asked you peacefully to leave, and you have refused. And so now we give you this final message. He reached into his robes and pulled out a crystal sphere that glowed with inner light. And Una recognized it immediately as a peace crystal. A sacred Velthari object that represented their bond with another species. Varnth held the sphere high above his head so everyone could see it. And then he threw it to the ground where it shattered into 1,000 pieces. And the sound it made was like a scream. The Velthari Dominion declares war upon humanity, Varnth said. And his voice was filled with pride and anger. We will take back what is ours. And we will teach you the price of defying our will. The assembly erupted into chaos. And delegates from 100 different species began shouting and running for the exits. And many of them had never seen a war declaration in their entire lives because the galaxy had known peace for so long. But Una did not run, and she did not shout, and she did not show any fear at all. And instead she simply smiled. It was not a nervous smile or a forced smile. And it was the genuine warm smile of someone who had just received news they had been waiting for. And that smile confused Varnth more than any weapon could have. You smile, Varnth said. and his crystalline face twisted with anger. "Do you not understand what I have said, human? And do you not know that 40,000 warships are ready to descend upon your worlds?" Yuna stepped forward to the speaking platform, and her smile never wavered. And when she spoke, her voice was calm and clear. "High Speaker Varnth," she said, "on behalf of the human collective, I thank you for this formal declaration. And I appreciate that you have followed proper diplomatic protocols." Whispers spread through the assembly like wildfire, and many delegates stopped their panicked flight to stare at the human ambassador, who seemed completely unconcerned about the destruction of her entire civilization. "I would request a 72-hour grace period before hostilities begin," Yuna continued. "This will give us time to prepare our response. And it is customary under the Concordia Accords," Varnth laughed, and the sound was harsh and mocking, and his crystalline body flashed with colors of contempt. "You want time to prepare," he said. "Very well, human, and we will grant you your 72 hours. And you may use that time to say goodbye to everything you have ever known. And when the time is done, we will crush you like insects." "Thank you for your generosity," Yuna said, and she bowed slightly. And her smile never left her face. Varnth turned away in disgust and led his delegation from the chamber. And as they left, many other species followed them. And soon the great hall was nearly empty, except for a few delegates who remained to watch the humans. Ambassador Dravok of the Corvani Collective was one of those who stayed, and he was ancient even by his species' standards. And he had lived for nearly 4,000 years, and he remembered things that most of the galaxy had forgotten. He approached the human delegation with slow, careful steps, and his apprentice Selaith followed close behind him. And when he reached Yuna, he looked at her with eyes that held deep concern. "Ambassador Siong," Dravok said, and his voice was soft and troubled. "Do your people truly understand what they face? And do you know that the Velthari have weapons that can crack planets in half?" Yuna turned to face him, and for a moment her smile faded and something else showed in her eyes. And it was something old and tired and very, very patient. "Elder Dravok," she said, "I know exactly what we face, and I know exactly what we are. And that is why I smile." Dravok studied her face for a long moment, and then understanding dawned in his ancient eyes, and he took a step backward. "They do not know," he whispered. "The Velthari do not know, and they have forgotten. And they never learned." "Forgotten what?" Selaith asked, and she looked between her master and the human ambassador with confusion. What did the Velthari not know? Dravok took his apprentice by the arm and began to lead her away. And as they walked, he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "The Velthari rose to power during the Long Peace," he said. "They were refugees once from a world far from human space. And they never fought in the Great War, and they never saw what humans can do. But the Great War ended 3,500 years ago," Selaith said. "Surely the humans have changed since then. And surely they are peaceful now." Dravok stopped walking and turned to look at his apprentice with eyes that had seen too much. "My child," he said, "do you know why the Concordia Accords exist? And do you know why every species in the galaxy agreed to stop fighting? And do you know why no one has broken the peace in 35 centuries? Selaith shook her head, and she could see that her master was genuinely afraid. And that frightened her more than anything else. "It was not because we wanted peace," Dravok said. "It was because the humans won the Great War. And they won it so completely and so terribly that every surviving civilization begged them to stop. And the Concordia Accords were not a peace treaty between equals." He leaned closer to his apprentice, and his voice dropped even lower. "The Concordia Accords were humanity's terms of surrender," he said. "And every species in the galaxy signed them because the alternative was extinction. And the Velthari have just declared war on the species that made the entire galaxy kneel. In the distance, Eunice Young was speaking quietly with her fellow human delegates, and none of them showed any fear. And all of them wore the same calm, knowing smile. What will happen now? Salaith asked. Drevok turned away and continued walking toward the exit. And when he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of ancient memory. Now we will learn if humans have truly changed in 3,000 years, he said. And we will learn if they remember mercy, and the galaxy will hold its breath. And we will all pray that the Velthari realize their mistake before it is too late. Behind them, the shattered pieces of the peace crystal lay scattered across the floor, and they caught the light and sparkled like stars. And they looked almost beautiful, but Salath could not stop thinking about the human ambassador's smile. And she could not shake the feeling that she had just witnessed the beginning of something terrible, and somewhere in the depths of human space, in shipyards that had been silent for more than 3,000 years, ancient machines began to wake.